Coming up on tonight's episode of Faith versus Culture, the American gospel versus the biblical gospel. Conversation with Dr. Michael Brown coming up next.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Faith versus Culture right here on the CBN News Channel. My name is Dan Andros. I'm managing editor of CBN's FaithWire.com, joined as always by Billy Hallowell, also of CBN's FaithWire. Billy, big topic today.
It is, yeah, this political seduction of the church. That is the topic and also the title of a new book from Dr. Michael Brown. And, you know, just before we bring him on here, it's really interesting because the church is in a fascinating position right now with where we are, you know, politically, culturally, and socially, and then because of that, sort of theologically. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're seeing more and more on both sides of the aisle. This is not unique to one political party, but I think you're seeing this merger, this sort of confusion when it comes to what our allegiance is actually to ultimately. And I think people struggle with this. They think that their political views are ultimately the most in line with the gospel. But as we're gonna examine today, is that the right way to be thinking about it? So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because the subtitle of the book is How Millions of American Christians Have Confused Politics with the Gospel. So we want to welcome Dr. Michael Brown to the show today. How you doing?
Doing great. So good to be with you.
All right, so I'm gonna start with a simple question, and that question is, what convinces you that Christians have really confused politics with the gospel in this way?
Well, I'm an eyewitness to it. I lived through it as we did, especially in the 2020 elections. I agree that we're dealing with existential issues. I agree that the battle for life, pro-life, the battle for family, international issues, Israel, there are massive things. And we really realize that one party may be going in a direction that we agree with and the other party we disagree with, or one candidate is going to fight for us and the other candidate going to fight against us. But when we put our trust in the political system to change society, when we become more consumed with winning the elections than winning the lost, when we marry the gospel with politics, when our Christianity becomes an appendage to a political party, we have confused politics with the gospel. I never saw more fervent prayer across America than I did among believers right before and after the 2020 elections. But it wasn't prayer for revival. It wasn't prayer for the Great Commission. It was prayer for a candidate to win the elections, a candidate I voted for, but recognizing that only Jesus can save America. And when we look to a person to do what only God can do, when we look to a flawed human system, because politics is part of the flawed human world, when we look to that to do what only the gospel can do, we have been confused. And I watched it happen in front of my eyes, almost to fever pitch. We were more obsessed with the elections than we were in love with Jesus. At least that's how it felt.
Yeah. So how hesitant were you to write this book? I'm interested for this answer because regardless, you know that the tribalism is so exaggerated these days more than ever. And so we've always had partisanship, but it feels like the tribalism through social media and everything else is so just so elevated right now that no matter what you say, it feels like this is all you're gonna get hit from one side or the other, probably both sides.
Yeah, I wasn't hesitant at all because I knew it needed to be written, and I felt burdened by the Lord. And that's something that ever matters to me. It's not a matter of courage. It's a matter of when you know what you have to do, you do it. When the need is there, you get involved. But I'm not naive. I fully understand that many will be offended. Look, we got to a point where the issue is not in the church who is Jesus, but who is Trump. Because, and I'm not blaming him for this. I'm not blaming him. I'm blaming us. You had Christians saying you cannot be a Christian and vote for a man like that. You had other Christians saying, if you don't vote for Trump, you're not a Christian. And I thought the thing that divided us was who Jesus is. That's what separates us from the world. The moment I began to address certain issues, like all the failed prophecies that Trump was going to serve 8 consecutive years, when it didn't happen, and people buying into QAnon conspiracy theories. I mean, I had minister of the gospel friends telling me, you watch, Biden is about to be removed by the military. He's a puppet president. Trump is about to be reinstalled. They were giving the dates when it was going to happen. And the moment I confronted these things, I lost thousands of social media followers. So be it. We're not in it for numbers or popularity. I just want people to hear the message, because if the church doesn't get things right, it's all over for America. And our calling is so transcendent. It's so higher than politics. We get involved in politics, but we are not an appendage to the political system. We are in this world, but not of it. We operate based on different principles. And if we are more our allegiance to a candidate or a party than we are known for allegiance to Jesus, our priorities are out of whack. So I know for our good, we must get this right. So I felt I had to write the book, regardless of the consequences.
Well, and we're going to talk about the prophecies after too, because I think it's important to actually dig into that a little bit more. But one of the things I want to sort of talk about here briefly is, and maybe it's a clarifying point for people, you believe that Christians should be involved in politics. You're not saying don't be involved in politics. That's not your message. So where is that line, though? Because, being involved in politics and then going off the rails, where is the line there so that people sort of know how to appropriately, from a Christian perspective, engage in our political system?
Yeah, so the last chapter of the book, I really try to break it down practically. So it's not just theoretical, but always, 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 I say it repeatedly, yes, we should be involved in politics. Yes, it's a sacred privilege that we have living in a democratic society as opposed to living in ancient Rome or communist China today. So we should exercise our prerogatives. So we should all be informed about the major issues. We should know where the candidates stand on those issues. Some are called to greater involvement, to lobby. Others are called to run for office. But we have to put first things first. Our emphasis is gospel first. Our emphasis is Great Commission first. And then we never compromise our convictions. I just did a Twitter poll, Billy, where I asked people, what's more important for the long-term good of America, to get our candidate of choice in the White House or for the church to maintain its witness? It's like 95, 96% said for the church to maintain its witness. So we never bring ourselves down into the dirt of politics, but we enter as God's people. So it's a matter of emphasis. It's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of keeping pure in the midst of something that's often filled with corruption and compromise.
What do you think, Dr. Brown, is the trigger that leads people into sort of this area where they become so willing to just turn a blind eye to certain things in order to support a candidate? What do you think causes that?
Yeah, so it is seduction, which is subtle. I think the issues are so important to us. When you think about the shedding of innocent blood, when you think about radical transgender activism, when you think about, say, the rise of China and what that could do, and you think if we get this candidate in, they're going to fighting for religious liberties, for the generations to come, for our kids, for our grandkids. We get so caught up in the moment that we misplace our trust. And then because we are so influenced by secular media and by the mob mentality on social media that we just get caught up. And before we know it, we sound more like partisan political people. We confuse America with the kingdom of God. We wrap the gospel in the American flag. So it's a subtle thing. It's understandable. I have a chapter on how President Trump went from our candidate to a political superhero to a savior, to the point that people are saying only Trump can save America. I don't blame him for that. I blame us for thinking in that way. But it's because the thing is so intense and because we get so caught up and we're provoked by the drumbeat of the world that we lose our spiritual bearings. If we were spiritually deeper, if we were more discipled, if we were more grounded in the word and secret prayer, I don't think we'd be so easily seduced.
Yeah, I mean, good words. I mean, I do think that, I mean, you mentioned the hope, and I do think that that is one area where people go off the rails, is just putting their hope in politics, for yearning for some sort of perfect paradise. Of course you want to support the candidates that support your values, but I think we can do that and temper that with realizing that this is a fallen world, and you're not going to have some Garden of Eden here that people pine for. Like, you're just not going to get that. It's more about our sanctification process along the road, and what do we do with the circumstances that are around us that glorifies God. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break here and be back with more with Dr. Michael Brown after the break. This is Faith versus Culture on the CBN News Channel.
We're back with more of Faith versus Culture. We're here with Dr. Michael Brown. Now, Dr. Brown, you were talking about something in the last segment that I find really interesting, and it's that sort of cultural coming into the church, right? And we saw this with Obama, and we saw it again with Trump. With Obama, there were a lot of claims of, oh, look, people on the left are worshiping him. He's being held up, as a Messiah, and there were all sorts of jokes about that. But it does seem like culture has come into the church in some ways, as you were talking about. How do we course correct that? How do we turn back time on that and fix it?
Yeah, we've got to become Jesus-centered, Jesus-consumed, God-consumed people. President Obama was the chosen one. I mean, they had the messianic imagery. He was the chosen one. And I saw pastors, Christian leaders, quoting scriptures about the Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ, and applying that to Trump, thinking, what are we? Have we lost our minds? But it's just like Israel when they wanted a king because they weren't happy with God. You have to think, your average kid, let's say they go off to school. They're in a secular environment, a public school, and maybe ungodly influences all day. And then you think if they spend 3 minutes of quality conversation with their parents, that's not going to undo all the junk. Well, it's the same with adults. If we are just absorbed with the news cycle, if we are just consumed with the latest social media posts, blasting this one and mocking this one and so on and so forth, and getting all worked up, they're stealing the elections for us, or we'll never be free again, whatever it is. And then we come to church once a week. That's not going to balance it out. So what we have to do is regain our focus. I've been doing monthly prayer retreats. I cut down on my travel schedule to spend one weekend a month just alone with God, praying and seeking his face. It has been so important for me to do that. Even with the busyness of ministry, you get pulled. No. Get back down to the street. Everything is small in this world. America is small. The most famous politician is small. The kingdoms of this earth are here today, gone tomorrow. Only God is big. Only God demands that level of worship. And look, whoever comes in, whatever the political leader is, there's only so much good they can do because they're regular human beings. And we got a system with the good old boys and this party versus that party. It's only the gospel that's going to bring about real change. And in this world, we'll never see complete transformation until Jesus returns. So the whole heart and soul of this is to recapture our adoration for the Lord. And then with a burning heart, let's go out and make a difference in our communities. Let's go out and bring the Great Commission. Let's go out and help those in need. Even if you look at the BLMs and Antifas and these others and the riots and the madness of that, behind it is this idea of a Marxist utopia, that everything's just going to be equal and perfect for everyone. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in the political system on either side, but the gospel is the hope. If we refocus on the Lord and regain our passion and adoration for him, then the lesser gods will fade away.
Yeah. And I think people forget a few things. Number one, they forget that God is the one who raises and deposes kings. So any ruler that comes in did not come in apart from the sovereignty of God. So, I mean, that is something to keep in mind. A lot of people were saying, like, a lot of Christians will say, like, oh, well, this leader, when the guy they like is in, they say this person was in. I look at what God's doing here. Well, God's also doing something when the other guy gets in, right? Look at how many bad kings there were in Israel over the years. I mean, it's a lot more than good ones.
In fact, I've asked the question for those of us who voted for Trump, and thank God for the good that he did and for the access Christian leaders had to him. It was unprecedented, and he had many good appointees. I'm deeply grateful for that, and he paid quite a price for doing that. The problem is when we have, quote, our man, for those of us who voted for him, our man in the White House, we tend to look to the White House. And when we don't have our man in, we tend to look to God in prayer. Often we see greater revival in the church greater progress in the church when we have someone in power that we don't like, because we get the one in that we like and we put our trust in them. And it seems we never learn. Often what we think is for our worst is actually for our best if we'll learn our lessons.
Amen. That is exactly where I was going with that. My next point was going to be, I think Christians don't like to hear this, but where Christianity, not that you pine for, oppression and different persecutions going on, but when you look at where Christianity flourishes, a lot of times there's a common theme. And I mean, look where it's flourishing now in China, in the Middle East, Iran, all these places you're seeing Christianity emerge. It's where they're oppressed the most. And I think it's exactly for the reason that you mentioned. So I want to just turn to the people watching that. Like, how can they, Dr. Brown, in your estimation, kind of gauge when maybe they've kind of veered into this territory? What do you think they should be looking for to think, maybe I have an unhealthy balance here?
Yeah, so I do my best in the political seduction of the church to be practical and to sketch out, this is what happened. In other words, here are the symptoms. Did this happen to you? You go to a doctor and he starts asking you questions for the symptoms. So we try to lay out some of the symptoms. I mentioned when we're more consumed with winning the elections than winning the loss, when we wrap the gospel in the flag. But I'd say, what's the condition of your heart? Are you absorbed with the Lord, worshiping him, recognizing that God is on the throne? Or are you just focused, we got to win these elections. We got to shift the balance of power. What dominates your thinking? If I went to your social media page, would I see that you're just like the world, that you're attacking the other side, that you're just as nasty, that you're posting memes mocking a political candidate? Or would I find that it's about the Lord and about honoring the Lord and about blessing your brothers and sisters? Where's your focus? What dominates your heart? The late Larry King made a comment that he thought all over America during the Trump presidency that not a day went by that his name was not mentioned at least one time in someone's home across America. And I thought, I wonder in Christian homes what we're talking about more, who we're talking about more, who has our focus, and are we confident, having prayed and put everything in God's hands, that he is sovereign and in control? Or do we think everything is out of control and in the hands of earthly people? I had to guard my heart against election fever in 2020 because I knew, as one who writes on these things and does radio on these things, it's so easy to get caught up. I'd have to step back and worship God and say, you are God, you are King, exactly what you said. You are sovereign. And I bow down. Is there peace and confidence in your heart there, or constant agitation because of the elections? Something's wrong if it's the latter.
I think back to the fact that a lot of times when our guy, right, is in office, the person we like, we also tend to not pay attention. We tend not to look at what is going on in terms of, if there's something that's there that maybe violates truth or isn't good, we're not going to talk about it. We're going to pretend it's okay, or we're going to excuse it. And I think that's worth talking about for a moment, because it would seem as believers, we're called to truth. Not that we have to condemn the person we like in office, but that if something is going on, how should we be reacting to it as Christians if it's something that does clearly violate the truth?
Yes. So the first priority is us maintaining our witness before the watching world. That is the number one priority before the Lord and for the good of our country. So we got blasted because we are the moral majority. We are the values voters. We are the ones shouting character counts. And critics were pulling out, even Christian critics, all these quotes from evangelical leaders as to why we could not vote for Bill Clinton. By that same logic, we couldn't have voted for Donald Trump. And we just kind of swept it under the carpet. The right answer was to say, yes, we don't like these aspects of his life, but right now it's an existential battle for the life of the unborn, and we think he'll save more baby lives, and that's important. But when he behaves in a way that we don't like, we say so. I found that many would rally to defend him by saying, we're not electing a pastor, we're electing a president. I understand, but we're first and foremost known as followers of Jesus. So what we had to be at sometimes was the president's loyal opposition, to use a phrase from an Old Testament scholar about the prophets of Israel. We had to say, sir, with all respect, we appreciate what you're doing, but you cannot savage people like this. You cannot call people dogs. You cannot act in this way. We cannot stand together with you in doing it. And I know Some of the men on the president's Faith Advisory Council were always in his face for this very issue. But we didn't feel that on a national level. Your average person watching TV would get the idea that we evangelicals were in bed with Trump and there was nothing he could do that would offend us because he was our man, and it made us look hypocritical and it hurt our witness.
Yeah, tough words there, but truth that needs to be heard. Dr. Michael Brown, the book is The Political Seduction of the Church, How Millions of American Christians Have Confused Politics with the Gospel. There's a lot more we could talk about, but we're going to have to leave it there because of time, but encourage everyone to get the book, and really appreciate you spending a few minutes with us here today on the program.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, we're back here on Faith versus Culture, and Billy, great conversation with Dr. Brown. It was great having him on. He does a lot of work in writing and theology and covering the news, and so great to hear his perspective on things. And honestly, it's one of those things that should be a convicting truth to us, because we all get into the politics game like it's sport from time to time, and we all probably go too far at sometimes. And so it's good to step back and evaluate what is ultimately at the top spot in our hearts.
Well, and as people who have often criticized culture being so dire and terrible as we have appropriately, we should also be assessing how much has culture come into our lives, not only in general, but specifically when it comes to politics, how we're processing world events. This is something that should be a constant state of reassessment, right? So I love that he talked so passionately about that.
Yeah, and again, the way he struck that balance between, you fight for the issues that you care about. This doesn't mean you just lay down and let the quote unquote opposition roll over you. Not that at all. You still fight for your values, but you don't step over the line to where you're fighting for your values at the expense of some of your other values, right? And so you've got to balance that there. And sometimes, especially now, how hyper political it is, that can easily get out of balance. So a great conversation with Dr. Michael Brown today. We'll be back to wrap it up on the other side of the break. This is Faith versus Culture. All right, that's all the time we have for this episode of Faith versus Culture. As always, thank you so much for watching. God bless. Have a fantastic week. We'll be praying for you, and we'll see you back here then. God bless.